Today, we track 24,000 objects. You mentioned a little over 10,000 active payloads, 14,000 fragments of space debris. We fully anticipate that number of trackable objects to be over 100,000 objects in less than a decade.
Thousands of companies show up to sell their technology to the U.S. Department of Defense each year. But so few will transition from proof of concept to true production across the valley of death. The select few who do, their stories are rarely told. Until now, I'm Noah Scheinbaum, and this is Crossing the Valley.
Founded in 2016, LeoLabs is focused on the ability to detect, track, characterize, and respond to threats in space. They host a proliferated multi-mission radar network, real-time orbital data catalog, and they provide AI-powered analytics to support space operations. The company is led by CEO Tony Frazier, who joined straight from Maxar Technologies, where he was the executive vice president and general manager of Earth Intelligence. He previously led teams at Cisco Systems and Infor. Tony joined us to share the story of how LeoLabs commercialized out of Stanford and to give us the inside scoop on the company's two recent wins, a StratFi and a TACFI award that have it on a path to growth in the defense market. Enjoy. All right, everyone, welcome back to Crossing the Valley. I am really excited to be joined this morning by Tony Frazier. Tony's the CEO of LeoLabs. And Tony, we're really grateful to you for making a little time to join us.
Thank you, Noah. Appreciate you making the time.
Absolutely. Tony, let's start with, we love to start with why here, and we'll talk about your background and the incredible career that you've had. But talk to us a little about the problem of space activity. What is going on in the space domain today that has created the burning platform for a company like LeoLabs?
Thanks, Noah. Appreciate the opportunity. So we've seen really an acceleration of activity in space. So there's both increased threats in space and also increased threats from space. So just in the last 5 years, we've seen the total number of objects in low Earth orbit grow by 10x. So there are now 24,000 objects that we track every day, over 10,000 active satellites, close to 14,000 fragments of space debris. And so really the genesis of the company started with a focus on what we thought might be a darkening of the skies when CubeSats were introduced back in the mid 2010s. But now we've seen it manifest in just a ton of activity in the domain. And so what we do is we're focused on providing persistent tracking of all of that activity so that we can help our customers keep their assets safe and secure.
Yeah, so it's kind of like, you couldn't really get DoorDash or Uber Eats before you had the network of drivers or infrastructure to be able to deliver things to people's homes. Then those businesses were emergent. Sort of, I don't know, maybe this comparison's way out on a limb, but LeoLabs sort of needed the space industry to mature a bit for folks to be launching a bunch of stuff into space for the problem of space debris and space domain awareness to really become to that burning platform, that urgent operational priority.
That's right. Yeah. No, it ties into our mission, statement. So we think of, our goal is to safeguard our way of life on Earth by building the living map of activity in space. And so we're highly reliant on space for everything from communications to remote sensing to precision navigation and timing, weather forecasting. And so our mission is to make sure that we help all those space operators, keep those assets safe and secure.
Love it. One of the things the primary focus of this podcast is transitions across the multiple valleys of death. And I think the origin story of LeoLabs is a really interesting one, right? It's technology that came out of a university. So tell us that story. How did the actual technology that powers the company get started?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting founding story. So our founders came out of Stanford Research Institute, which is a federally funded research and development corporation that was affiliated with Stanford. It's out of Menlo Park, California. And the team came out of two different labs. One was focused on doing radio astronomy research through building radar technology. The other was focused on looking at some of these growing problems, in terms of threats, in space. And so the team that had built our initial radar in Alaska was trying to analyze northern lights, and they had a lot of noise in the data. And it turned out that they were tracking satellites and didn't know it. And so the other lab, saw that as an opportunity to take the tech to support a DARPA program. And so that was really kind of the genesis of the business. And so that team got together. SRI had a ventures group where they would spin out and commercialize technology if you can go raise seed funding. And so that's what the team did in 2016.
Yeah, it's like so many great businesses where the business ends up, it starts as an accident, right? It's like, hey, this is not what we set out to do, but this is kind of where we are. So talk us through, Tony, a little bit, and then we'll come back to you. But how does Leo actually approach the problem today? Three kind of organizational units or three focus areas around traffic management, launch and operations, domain awareness. Maybe talk us through how you're organized, and then are you actually installing radars? Are you a software company? Are you a services company? How should we think about the business?
Yeah, no, we've built a vertically integrated solution. So we really wanted to start from the problem backwards and build out, a full stack that could support the mission. And so going back to the founding days of the company, it had built a radar in Alaska, and that was kind of the initial asset that made up our network. And so we raised venture capital. So we've raised over $140 million, through Series B. To build out a global network. So we now have 11 active radars across 7 sites around the world. And so one of the things that's important in low Earth orbit for tracking is you need geographic diversity in your sensor network to be able to detect and track new activity and predict where there may be conjunctions between two objects in space. And so that really is kind of the foundation of our capability. So we own and operate those 11 fixed site sensors. And then that feeds into an orbital catalog through a cloud-based platform that we built that's able to process millions of measurements per day that we collect across the network. And then the astrodynamics engine allows us to do accurate predictions, of a potential conjunction between two objects. And so that cloud-based platform feeds a lot of analytics, which our customers consume. And so, today, the core of our business model is we license access to that data as a service, and we support different types of analytical missions for both the U.S. government, international government, and commercial organizations. And so that's really kind of the core of the business model.
Yeah, it's awesome laydown. Maybe you ended actually in a great place for us to segue into customers. But so talk between the U.S. government, international governments, and then commercial customers. What's kind of the rough split in your business today? Where's the main locus of activity?
Yeah, so U.S. government is about a third of our revenue. International is about 60%, and the balance is commercial. So we've actually been able to build this business, even though the early funding was supporting U.S. funded research. We've been able to build a very diversified customer base. I think the reason we've seen that mix is that many of the customers, particularly on the international side, they're seeing the same trends that we've seen in the U.S., where this exponential growth in objects in space is driving their investment in their military space commands, and they don't have the same types of sensor networks that the U.S. government has. And so we've been able to augment their architectures by filling in geographic gaps. If you think about it, an object in low Earth orbit is doing an orbit traveling 17,000 miles an hour, and particularly the adversarial payloads, they can maneuver their spacecraft, and you can lose track of those objects. And so having systems in different geographic locations, northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, equatorial regions, allows us to be able to persistently track those objects. So that's really kind of the value proposition for the international governments. And then for the commercial organizations, there are publicly available data sources that the U.S. government provides to help support that mission. But again, most of the what's called the space surveillance network, which has historically satisfied this mission through a combination of space domain awareness and missile warning radars. Most of them are in the northern hemisphere, and so we're able to supplement that coverage with other geographic areas. And so our customers benefit from that. They also, we built a modern platform, so we have very low latency from when we collect data to when we deliver insights, and so the customers are able to integrate that into their operation. So overall, over 90% of satellites in orbit leverage our data in some capacity to support their missions.
Wow. Yeah. So you guys are definitely the market leader then in that space. Over 90% is a pretty significant number. The most important thing, though, I think the most important question I'll ask today is really how many people at LeoLabs are currently betting on Polymarket or on Kalshi about the likelihood of a meteor impacting the Earth in the next couple of years. I just was looking before here. I think this is nested bets, right? It's like a 33% chance that NASA gives more than a 5% chance of a meteor strike in the next year or two. Is that the talk of the town over there?
It is. One of our co-founders, Ed Liu, is a former astronaut, and in addition to his role as CTO of LeoLabs, he's quite well known in the asteroid field. He has another nonprofit focused on that mission. So he would be a ringer if we put him in the betting markets.
Well, we're recording this just I think a day after Fred Smith, famously, the famous FedEx founder, who famously took the last, I believe it was the last, $25,000-$30,000 that the company had, took it to Vegas, or maybe it was the last $5,000 the company had, took it to Vegas and turned it into $30,000 on blackjack, which kept them open for another week. You guys are nowhere near that cash position, but maybe there's a part of the balance sheet that goes into Polymarket betting for LeoLabs.
Yeah, you never know.
That is sorry for taking us off track there. But Tony, so you mentioned one of the co-founders, and I think it's a good part to come back to your story, which is that, you've been in the space arena for a while, but you were at a large, well-established company. We've had others from Maxar on the podcast previously. Where are you in this mission? How did you end up at LeoLabs? Why does this appeal to you?
No, thanks. I've always been fascinated about applying emerging technologies, to important missions. I came out of grad school in the late 90s during the internet and e-commerce boom, and so worked at a couple of startups, one of which came out of MIT and got acquired by IBM, and then worked at larger tech companies until 2010, and then made a mid-career pivot into the commercial space industry. So joined a company, GOI. At the time, they were one of two providers of commercial imagery to the U.S. government, but did it via a dual use model. GOI combined with Digital Globe in 2013, and then became Maxar in 2019 timeframe. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to take on different roles. During that journey, came in with more of a product background. So that was kind of my functional discipline, growing up in the industry, but then was able to run P&Ls over time. And so ended my time at Maxar leading the public sector Earth intelligence business. So that had all the work we did with the NRO, NGA, Army, over 60 allies around the world, where they were leveraging our geospatial intelligence capabilities to support their missions. And so, I'm really passionate about applying innovative technology to mission. And so, Maxar was a kind of a wonderful journey, to be so impactful. I think about what we did in supporting humanitarian assistance, disaster response, the role we played, in supporting the Ukraine, conflict. I wanted to be able to, apply, a similar, set of skills, to a mission I thought was equally important. And so, when the opportunity presented to join LeoLabs, and I got to spend time with both the leaders and the founding team, and just saw that kind of the brilliant capabilities that they had and what they had built in terms of a unique technical capability, but needed help on how to scale, go to market, product, and P&L. That was it was a perfect match.
Yeah, it's super cool, and I think what's interesting is you kind of from those early days of the companies that would then become become Maxar, as it put those different pieces together, you saw a trajectory around geospatial intelligence that went from being something that was kind of niche and specific to something that was super widespread and very democratized, to overuse to cite an overused word. But I think it was, it's something that we all now kind of have in our pockets, so to speak. Where do you think space domain awareness is at in that trajectory? Do you see it? Is it on a similar path, or is it something that's kind of totally different?
No, it's very similar. I think we're in the early innings, of that evolution. But in terms of the potential, as I mentioned earlier, I mean, we're so reliant, on space today. And you think about the amount of, how we all use maps, every day, to get from point A to point B. How we become reliant on assured communication. Having the ability to see and provide transparency from space, all those capabilities are really kind of foundational, to our way of life. And so, in our mind, there's a need to build a living map of activity that then allows, continuity of operations, for all of those missions. And so that really kind of underpins the core of our value proposition. Once you have that map, you can also kind of reveal insights for different mission partners. And so, one of the things that that we're seeing, and it really has kind of accelerated a pivot in our company, going from providing space situational awareness, to persistent orbital intelligence, is that many of our military customers really, they want to be able to have a real-time understanding of everything that's happening in space. And when there's some anomaly to normal, they want to be able to get an early warning, so they can have an advantage, over their adversaries. And so, the going from a nice to have to a must have, capability, I've kind of saw during my time at Maxar, it's really important, to, not just supplement the mission, but be foundational, to the mission. And we're seeing ourselves in a position, where we're bringing that, to both our allies, as well as working with different stakeholders across the U.S. government.
As we move into this conversation of some of those transitions, because I think you guys have gone, from something that was a far out idea or a niche idea to something that's much more proliferated. Have you ever been approached by a customer that y'all would not sell to?
Not that I can think of. I think that what we do have to be careful about, how we protect, our data, and make sure that it's not used in ways that would put U.S. Or allied assets at risk. But again, that was something that we had to deal with extensively, during our time at Maxar, and so we've kind of worked hard to put the right controls, onto our system to prevent that.
Totally. Okay, so let's run the tape back a little bit and try to trace this storyline. When you think about kind of the early days of the go-to-market approach at Leo, and what the founders were trying to do there, what were those first touch points with the government like? And do you have a sense of, was that something that was there a high degree of friction, or was it something where whether it was the U.S. government or an international government? Maybe take us through some of those early conversations.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely. So the company, as I mentioned earlier, when it spun out of Stanford Research Institute, it had a number of funded programs with the U.S. government. So the initial grants, that had led to the artificial radar, that was built in Alaska, came through NSF, National Science Foundation funding, and then also DARPA. Funded research. And so when we spun the technology out of SRI to create LeoLabs, the DARPA in particular, was an ongoing customer of ours, to be able to do research, to demonstrate, how the radar technology could be applied, to that space domain awareness mission. And that had been, the company was founded in 2016, kind of through 2018, when we did our Series A round. financing, that was kind of the early touch points, into the government, more proving the art of the possible through funded research. I think that what then happened was we saw that there were a number of policies, that started to show that there would be an opportunity to create a commercial industry here. So during the first Trump administration, there was Space Policy Directive 3 that was issued, and that led to a desire to move the space safety mission from what is now the U.S. Space Force and U.S. Space Command to a civil agency. And as part of that, they had intended to leverage commercial capabilities to the maximum extent possible. And so that happened around the 2018 timeframe. The agency that picked that up, the Department of Commerce, didn't get funded until 2022. So we had to navigate various small funded programs, kind of more funded R&D type efforts to while we build out our radar network, so build a commercial capability to support that class of mission, but there was no kind of sustained program funding for that, and so as a result, the company really pivoted hard to engage with commercial operators, and that has led to our commercial customer base, which is large in number, but relatively a modest amount of revenue that we were able to generate. But then the international partners really saw this big gap, and so we won a big contract in Asia. The Japanese government is a key customer of ours. That happened in 2022, and then we sustained them as an important mission partner. And then last year, we had tremendous growth. We grew 140% year over year. We added several other really important allies to our customer base, while we were also incubating some new technology that we're super excited about with our next generation radar technology. We had those wins with the U.S. government. And so now we're at this interesting phase where we built a strong customer base with our that's satisfied with our existing radar network. We've made tremendous progress in innovating with our next generation technology, and now we're looking at how we could really take on much more of the mission by fielding these systems at scale. And so that kind of led to a lot of our recent momentum, which we'll get into with the StratFi and TACFI awards that we received. But we see that as kind of a catalyst for taking on again a much larger portion of the mission that historically has been satisfied with large, bespoke, government-owned and operated systems.
Great laydown. Thanks for walking us through all that. It's a very common theme, I think, for companies that we've had on this show and just the industry writ large, space industry, defense and national security industry, really anybody doing business with the government. That's like, hey, there is a lag between the identification of a need, or in government speak, that need, the development of a requirement, and then the funding of that requirement at a level that allows the company to really kind of grow into a long-term relationship, a dedicated service provider. The story that you laid out of, hey, we kind of started here with the government, actually in government R&D, but even though it was government-funded R&D, there wasn't a glide path to turning that into a program right away, and so we had to go searching in other corners, the commercial space and the international space, even though it was government-directed R&D up front, right? And I think that's DARPA is notoriously, it's doing kind of science fiction at some points, or trying to turn science fiction into reality, and so there's not always actually, there's more often than not a glide path from a DARPA program to quote unquote program of record. But take us inside the room with some of those conversations, even as you think about, conversations you've had with government customers. It could be at Maxar, it could be at LeoLabs, where you've talked to folks and there's a need, but not the budget. Like, what are the folks in the government actually, do they tell you, hey, go look for money elsewhere because we're not going to be able to fund this? Do they say, oh, just give us a few years? Like, maybe for folks who maybe haven't sat in that chair, what is that conversation like?
I think there's a couple good analogous situations between my time at Maxar and then what we're kind of working through here at LeoLabs. So one of the efforts I worked on at Maxar was a JV that we established with Saab to create a 3D product, and do that at scale. So the JV was called Vricon, and it was really interesting. So Saab was a business partner of ours at Digital Globe at the time, and they had some really interesting image processing technology that could take our satellite imagery and convert that from a 2D map into a 3D map. And we had worked through a partner arrangement, but it wasn't going to be cost effective for Saab to kind of acquire access to our image library at scale. We didn't want to undermine the value of our image library for this application, and so we decided to do a 50-50 joint venture that eventually Digital Globe acquired control of down the road. But it was a really good example where we were able to not only build a 3D map, from visualization purposes, but we were also able to apply it to a number of operational missions. And I think that's really where I learned, what the magic of bringing together the warfighter demand signal. So getting kind of strong combatant command drivers of requirements, working with, the right type of acquisition, stakeholders, and then using that to go shape funding needs over time. And so we were able to go from a concept in early prototypes to getting the U.S. Army to really step up and they created a program called One World Terrain, which we were able to then use to rapidly scale our mission support to the U.S. government, and then eventually that led to a partnership between U.S. Army and the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency on how to support commercial adoption of 3D. And so, what's interesting about that experience and then kind of where we are in the journey at LeoLabs is we're seeing a similar trend, where the threats are real and growing in space. And the predominant threats to U.S. interests in space have been in geo, but they've moved now to low Earth orbit. And so, a few recent examples. You've seen the headlines in the news around the Russian activity in space. So Cosmos 2553 is an example of a satellite that has been reported to possibly be nuclear capable, in space. And so, our ability to track that asset, see change in behavior, of it over time, when it was tumbling. Have that confirmed, by having us cue Maxar to take a picture, of that asset. As an example, it's a way that we could show how we can be on mission, for a very topical threat. We've seen the same thing with China. China has been doing what's been reported as dogfighting in space. So 5 satellites that are doing rendezvous proximity operations, coming as close as 1 kilometer away from each other. And so that's created a strong awareness of the threat, and having commercial be able to demonstrate that it can be a relevant mission partner for that is helping us navigate that journey of how to build a sustained program. And so we've had very strong support from U.S. Space Command. So General Whiting, who, he's really bringing the combatant command demand signal. He's already outlined that his number 2 priority, from an integrated priority list is enhanced battle space awareness for space warfare. And so we are well aligned with that requirement. We've been working closely with different stakeholders within the U.S. Space Force. One thing that they do is they have what's called a joint commercial operations cell, where they're bringing in not classified information, so commercial and publicly available information, and demonstrating how that can support both persistent surveillance and other missions for the U.S. Space Force. And so that's allowing us to kind of build the kind of the foundational credibility to then shape bigger programs. So we've been doing that with both the U.S. Space Force and also working with the U.S. Department of Commerce to prove out that we can take on foundational missions, so catalog maintenance, persistent surveillance, and really be a key part of the architecture. So that's kind of led to some of our recent awards, but also some of the work we're doing to shape what we envision as the way commercial can be a key part of the architecture.
Absolutely. No, it's instructive and helpful to kind of talk through some of those specifics, because easy to kind of say, hey, diversify revenue or this is kind of how it works. But those specific, use cases or those specific walkthroughs, I think, are pretty enlightening. And that, Tony, I think brings us to, you guys have some recent news, big news, I believe last week, maybe a little bit over that. Congratulations, a TACFI award for LeoLabs, and that's on the heels of an even bigger StratFi award that LeoLabs won earlier this year. So walk us through those two deals with a little bit of the who and the what and the why, and what it means for kind of where you are as a company. Then we'll dive in a little bit. I want to hear how they came about.
Yeah, absolutely. So the two awards. So we received a $4 million TACFI award, and so that was in partnership with SpaceWorks, which is under the Air Force Research Lab, but it's really chartered with supporting scaling innovation that's relevant to the U.S. Space Force mission. And then we also won a $60 million StratFi award with the same organization. So the way these are structured, it's very much a public-private partnership where we combine our ability to go raise private capital, to implement, scaling capability with matching funding from both U.S. From the SpaceWorks, as well as working with our U.S. government program sponsors. And so this really is kind of taking a couple awards that we had in 23 and 24 to mature our next generation radar technologies. We were awarded two direct to phase 2 small business innovative research awards to build prototypes of our next generation radar technology, both in UHF and S-band. And then now we're kind of taking the next step in commercialization of that technology. And so we recently announced that we've kind of evolved our radar network, in two different classes of sensors. And so our current network is really powered by what we call our tracker class of radars, and they're very effective at being able to get multiple measurements a day, for those 24,000 objects I referenced, and maintain an accurate catalog of all orbital activity. What we are moving to is a next generation set of radars that allow us to be able to do much broader area search, and do that through both fixed sites as well as expeditionary and mobile deployments. And so we announced our Seeker radar, which is a prototype that we built in Arizona last year. We went from breaking ground to tracking 10,000 satellites a day in 5 months. And so then that allowed us to be able to take the next step in maturing that technology through our StratFi application, which we were awarded at the beginning of the year. And then we also announced a new mobile radar. We had a truck-based radar that we brought to the Space Symposium event in April. So we unveiled that at that event. But that system is really allows us to offer more of an expeditionary capability. And so the TACFI was to extend some of the software of that system to make it more effective, for emerging space domain awareness threats. And so we're really excited about the momentum that we're building with these systems, because both classes are going to allow us to fill key gaps in the Indo-Pacific region. Those are some of the early milestones that we're going to be taking on with those. And again, it's really to be able to support better detection and tracking of new launches, which those are escalating, at an exponential rate. also be able to maintain custody of payloads that maneuver. So if there's adversarial satellites that could put U.S. or allied interests at risk, it's a way for us to help our customers maintain custody of those. And so that's really going to drive the next phase of proliferating our network to deliver on that vision of persistent orbital intelligence.
It's a ton of effort that you guys have going on. Congratulations on all of that. Let's talk about the mechanics of those announcements, whether it's for tracking or this mobile radar site. How much of this is internal company roadmap where it's like, hey, we're going to invest against these capabilities versus we're co-investing alongside something that the government is asking us or implicitly asking us to develop? How's the roadmap getting formulated?
Yeah, great question. So I'd say that it's driven by our team's understanding of where the threat is going in terms of us, building new products that we feel can fill key gaps in the architecture, but it's highly informed based on our intimacy we're building with the U.S. government and our international customers. So we, as part of the work on the StratFi award, just to give a specific example, we have a current mission support that we're providing to the U.S. Space Force through this Joint Commercial Operations Cell. And so their goal is they want to be able to get as many looks a day at different adversarial satellites that exist. And so that's a good example where we understand what we can do today with our existing network, and then that's informing, well, what could we do better if we had this next generation of sensor? And so we work closely with that mission partner to educate them on where, what our vision was, for our, what additional sensors could bring to the mission. That stakeholder then provided SpaceWorks, an endorsement of, if industry can build this capability, we are going to continue to need, to, adopt their services and even take on more, of their capabilities over time, which then led to us being able to win, this award. And then now what we're doing is we're going to build a new system that's 4 times the size of the prototype we built in Arizona, in the Indo-Pacific region. And so it's going to be able to detect new foreign launches out of China. And that's super important right now. If you look at it, China did 64 launches last year. They're on pace to do over 100 in the near future. They have 2 mega constellations that they're going to build that is rumored to be allow them to get north of 30,000 satellites that they'll be flying in the next decade. And so we see a need to kind of fill that gap with a capability that will be on mission for the customer. The TACFI was similar in that we knew that our S-band radar technology would be able to be more condensed in terms of the size of an array that would be able to effectively track objects. And we had discussions with a number of our mission partners, and we talked about putting it on a mobile platform, having a container that can be on a truck, deployed rapidly to a fixed site, be able to be on the maritime platform. And so the feedback we've gotten has been tremendous. And so now it's building our confidence in, if we can do this at scale, how impactful it can be to mission.
Yeah. It's certainly lockstep with the customer. And then, if you're able to share, so if a TACFI is $4 million you're going to get for that capability, what do you think the company's co-investing alongside? Is that covering all of the development, or are you all putting a bunch of internal funds against it? You raised a whole bunch of money recently, I know, and so you certainly have some dry powder to put against big targets.
Yeah. So the way the TACFI is structured is a 50-50 co-investment. So we're receiving $2 million of funding from SpaceWorks, and then combined with $2 million of private funding to be able to extend this capability. And really, what it's allowing us to do is to take the hardware that is effective for a current mission and extend that software to to be able to support a much broader set of use cases, including one of the things that we've heard a lot of demand for is how this could go from a space domain awareness specific sensor to being able to extend into other adjacent missions like missile defense.
Yeah, love it. That's a good segue maybe as we think about, so where you are today. You and I were talking a little bit before about sports analogies. Help us understand, like, where is LeoLabs relative to full potential for the company? Are you guys fully kind of technical de-risked and R&D de-risked, and now we're just on execution? I mean, I think you've kind of answered that a little bit, but kind of give us a sense of where on that journey you are, and then what are you most excited about as you look to the years ahead? What should we expect to see from you guys?
Yeah, no, thank you. I think we've really burned down a lot of the technical risk in our solution, and now it's about scaling production and to be on mission for where the threat is going. And so today, we track 24,000 objects. Mentioned a little over 10,000 active payloads, 14,000 fragments of space debris. We fully anticipate that number of trackable objects to be over 100,000 objects in less than a decade. And so you're seeing this kind of growth of the number of things that need to be tracked, but then also the mix is shifting. If you look at just private investment over the past decade, there's been close to $300 billion of private investment. About a quarter of that's come from China to then underwrite these growing mega constellations that are being built. And so being able to maintain persistent custody of all those objects is really, really important for our customers. And so we're focused on how to scale production of these next generation radars to then be able to field a proliferated network of sensors that deliver on this vision of persistent orbital intelligence to support space traffic management, space domain awareness, and missile defense applications. And I think the timing is perfect, in terms of how the U.S. Space Force. I mean, we talked about the how things go through this cycle. The U.S. Space Force last April, in 2024, issued their commercial space integration strategy, and they outlined 8 mission areas, one of which was space domain awareness, and they outlined kind of an intent, to acquire commercial to the maximum extent possible. We're now seeing that through our participation in programs like the SBIR, the SDA. They have what's called a TAP lab where they integrate like new technologies. We're supporting the Joint Commercial Operations Cell. We received these StratFi and TACFI awards, and we're building the capabilities, to be on mission. And we feel like within several years, we can have this proliferated network that can really be a key part of the architecture. So imagine a future where there's U.S. owned, allied, and commercial systems that are all tipping and queuing each other, to be able to maintain custody of all both U.S. allied and adversarial threats in space. That's a really exciting future that we feel we can be at the forefront of. And so that's what's driving the growth that we've seen. Like I mentioned, 140% growth year over year from 24 to 25. We have strong growth in our forecast for this year, and we see that now getting to scale, to kind of realize the promise that the founding team had, when it was originally spun out of SRI.
Yeah, the space launch and the space industry writ large, just it's kind of ripping right now. We had and whether it's the big launch providers, we just had Tori Bruno from ULA on the podcast a few weeks ago, to what the Varda guys are doing now in manufacturing in space and so many of these other things. I'm kind of curious, if you weren't at Leo, if you weren't focused on this problem, what other kind of target, whether it's space or kind of the broader, kind of national security world, what other targets do you think are really big and juicy? Like, what else would you be focused on if you weren't running LeoLabs right now?
I think that the growing need for space infrastructure, as we go from, again, a world of what was hundreds of active payloads to now thousands, and it could be hundreds of thousands, and across all orbital regimes. I think there's a lot of exciting activity. I've gotten close to some of the folks from Impulse. I think they're doing some really exciting things. And so, again, being an enabler for the broader industry's growth and success is probably where I would be. And I think that obviously aligns well with LeoLabs, and see a lot of other interesting companies that are looking to contribute to different parts of the ecosystem.
It takes many to advance this industry. It's crazy to see how far it's come in such a short period of time, and we're just getting started. So, Tony, this has been awesome. Thank you for being so candid with us and for laying so much of this out. I guess if folks are interested in learning more about what you're doing or want to follow along the LeoLabs journey, or maybe they want to apply for a job, where should they go? Where should they be looking for all that stuff?
Yeah, we're at leolabs.space. So our website is a great place to start. We're also really active on LinkedIn, where we provide updates on our activity, including a weekly summary of things we're seeing relevant to orbital intelligence. And so I would start there, and look forward to having conversations. It's going to take a community to really realize the potential of this. So whether it's potential employees, business partners, other mission partners, we look forward to the conversations.
Awesome. Well, Tony, you've done so much already in your career, and we're really excited to see where you go from here. There's a lot of traction, a lot of momentum, and a lot of big targets still to come. So thank you for taking some time to join us this morning.
Thank you, Noah. Really appreciate it.